welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark, a special international bookmark with our guest Paul Badde, talking about the book Benedict Up Close, the inside story of 8 dramatic years, published by EWTN Publishing. And we're speaking all the way to Rome, to our EWTN studios in Rome, to welcome our author, Paul Badde. Welcome to EWTN's Bookmark. It's great to see you again, Paul.
Good afternoon, Doug. My pleasure.
Now, the last time we spoke, it was on a different book that gets mentioned in this particular book. What was that book about?
The book was about the veil of the face of God, which Benedict brought back to history. When he got there on September 1st in 2005, when he needed, he's been the first pope after more than 400 years to get on his knees in front of this veil, in front of this face.
Right. And so that actually shows up in this particular work as well. But let's talk about Benedict Up Close. Now, this is basically a collection, of magazine or newspaper articles that you wrote over that period of 8 years or so?
Newspaper, yeah. I've been a correspondent of the German daily Die Welt for, let's say, now for 20 years, and I covered all the pontificate of Benedict. Yeah, I've been very close to him from the first minute until the last one. And I remember too well, 606 years ago, in the 11th of February, the enormous lightning which struck the Dome of St. Peter's.
Right.
The very same night when he resigned.
Right, exactly, and you mentioned that obviously in the book itself. Now, you yourself, having come from Germany, did you know the Holy Father back in the days of Cardinal Ratzinger, or even before that?
Yeah, I know him from the 80s quite close. Yes, as a professor.
And how did you? And Paul, how did you first meet the future Holy Father?
Many years ago, as in Munich, actually, when he was Bishop of Munich, the Archbishop of Munich. Yeah.
Now, in this book itself, you say the book is not a biography of Benedict XVI. It focuses only on his time in office. Why did you decide to just focus on that time period?
I've been asked, I mean, is it like a chronicle? And I've been asked to publish these because I've been so close. We've been neighbors, and I've been a correspondent, and I covered the pontificate. And then I've been asked by a professor here in the German Institute, Historic Institute, said you got to publish these. These are the essential documents of that period of time.
Okay. Now, you also make the point that in putting this book together, that the articles were never enriched with later information. So you didn't go back and update anything or correct anything. You kind of left it just the way it happened at that time.
Right.
And so, in fact, when you're talking about certain things that are upcoming or not upcoming, you may not always be perfectly on the mark in the earlier article as to what actually happened later, right?
Right, yes.
Okay.
Because nobody could have imagined that he would resign, for instance.
Absolutely. Now, you also say almost all the pieces were written under pressure. Now, is that just the normal course of trying to meet deadlines?
Yes, I would say so, yes.
You know, often...
take in mind, I mean...
Yes, go ahead, Paul.
Excuse me?
No, go ahead, as far as the deadlines.
You follow him, and you got to write these pieces on your lap and in airplanes and buses and everywhere, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, when you write, and you were writing over the years, did you start writing, with a pen in a hand and taking notes, and then transition to a computer or a laptop? Is that what you did, like everybody else?
Right. I'm the analog kind. I'm the analog kind of correspondent. I start with the pen, with paper, and then later, of course, with the laptop.
Now, whenever you did an interview or any of these articles, things like that, did you record interviews many times, or would you just take notes?
It took notes only.
Okay, okay. Now, you say here that often in those 8 years, I see today, I was much weaker than the old Pope. What do you mean?
Yeah. Well, I'm a father of 5 kids, and I've been in Jerusalem before as being a correspondent during the Intifada in Jerusalem. So I was. The last time I talked to him, he said it's absolutely absurd to put a job like the Patriarch job onto your shoulders when you're 78 years. But that was his age when he became Pope, and he could understand it so well. I mean, imagine being 78 and become Pope. That's
right. Exactly.
He said it's absurd, but
most people are well into retirement by then, right?
Right.
Exactly.
And he dreamed of retirement.
Now, you mentioned in the book, and obviously coming from Germany, you talk about, and I thought there was overwhelming hostilities against the Pope from Germany. What were these overwhelming hostilities that you saw?
That's right. Cardinal Meister once said to me, he was the Mozart of how do you say, Mozart of theology.
Mm-hmm.
So he met so much envy among his theologian colleagues,
Mm-hmm.
the professors in Germany.
Right. So there were a lot of Salieri's out there who weren't pleased with Mozart, I guess is what you're really saying. A lot of jealousy.
Jealousy, yeah.
Absolutely.
Because he was, in those years, he was a shooting star, yeah, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, you also write here, you talk about making some of the points of, as we go into the book, some of his major accomplishments, his giant steps towards Judaism you talk about. You also talk about his one official first act he abolished after his election was the title of Pope Patriarch of the West. First of all, what does that title mean?
Right.
Why did he get rid of it? And why did you deem that so important to mention that right up front?
I mean, as I see today, look, he prepared the way, the path to the, let's say, to his processor. By God, to me, he was the last European. He said, that's over. The church isn't Europe anymore. It used to be a very European thing, the project, the church, the Catholic, yeah. He said, that's over.
Mm-hmm.
Now the church has become it's a world issue. It's not attached to a continent.
Mm-hmm. What do you view that as, a positive thing or a negative thing, or it just is what it is?
He enlarged the office.
Mm-hmm. I got you.
He said it's much broader than
Mm-hmm. So it was really him who set the stage for where we're going right now, in the sense of that kind of global church.
Right.
Okay. Now you also refer to him as my neighbor. Now, do you mean that in the sense that you literally live nearby, or what?
Right. I met him. I used to meet him every once in a while on the street when he was cardinal. Yes, and later I saw him. We were neighbors. In fact, we lived. Let's say at the cardinal, we lived 100 meters away of him. Yeah. And I met him every now and then in the streets.
Right. In fact, I think
St. Peter's Square.
Right. You even tell a story. Didn't you bump into him while he was taking the garbage out one time?
Right. There was, yeah. And he had just read an article of mine. He said when he discovered the Holy Face of Montebello, he had read that. He said he wanted to welcome me. He said, and was so embarrassed, as you can imagine. Yeah.
Now you mention right in the beginning, because you kick things off with Habemus Papam, April 19th, of course, and you say. Relief is the first thing in the features of Pope Benedict XVI. He throws his arms high over St. Peter's Square like a boxer all the way to the world that seems often to have pressed and shackled Joseph Ratzinger as recently as yesterday has suddenly fallen away from him. Now that seems like almost contradictory, in the sense you would think, well, here's somebody who now has the weight of the entire church on them, but you're saying he actually seemed more relieved.
More what?
Relieved. Less oppressed.
Yeah. Well, in the very first step, it was a miracle, yeah, because he agreed. I mean, he was absolutely against, and then he agreed absolutely in his belief, yeah.
Right.
I mean, there are many contradictions to him in his life. Look, that in the first homily on St. Peter's Square, he said, "Please pray for me that I don't flee." And then at the end, he was the one who got away.
Mm-hmm. Do you view him stepping down as fleeing?
Again, please.
Do you see his stepping down when he, ultimately as him fleeing? Meaning, you said he prayed. You asked him to pray not to flee.
In a way, yeah.
Okay.
In a way, yes.
Okay.
The thing is very interesting. When he was 17 years old, he was recruited by force by the Hitler army, yeah. And then what he did, it was in April 45. And then he said, "Oh no, I'm going home." It was very, very dangerous. He could have been shot at every corner in the area. Mm-hmm. But he just went home, and there his family awaited him. He said, "Oh my," he went back to mom and dad. I mean, it was fleeing the Hitler army, but he fled. He deserted the army. So, but that was to him it was a very, how should I say, it was a crucial experience in his life. I mean, to get back to his mother. And now it's very strange to me, not strange but significant, that the monastery he went to is called Mater Ecclesiae, Mother of the Church. So he went back to Mom somehow.
Okay. Now you also now do you drink a lot of champagne and usually pour it on your suit, or did that just happen one particular time and he happened to be there?
Yes, there was no. It was when he and Peter Sebald, a friend of mine, when he published his book, Salt of the Earth. Yeah, and I had helped him to do this, and then he met me, and I met him, and when it was presented, he met me, and he said he had a glass of champagne in my hand. He wanted to greet me, so it was the same embarrassment as later with the garbage. But at that time, with a glass of champagne in my hand, not with the garbage part.
Now you make the point that Joseph Ratzinger, the Pope, was never a careerist. Many of the others who did not have
Right.
this career. This went on well into the conclave, where some of the cardinals urgently tried once again to thwart his election. And we hear that as Catholics, and we kind of have this maybe overly naive idea that the Holy Spirit's guiding the whole process, and then we kind of hear a little bit, or we look behind the curtain and realize the sausage is being made in a certain way that we didn't realize. So how does something like that work? How do you know that there were people who were working against his election?
In a way, I mean, when you look back at him, and for instance, Georg Gens, when he's secretary, he recalls him as the little prince, little prince of Saint-Exupéry. To me, he was like a child. He was in a way like a child. What he did, he was dreaming very often, but on a very high level. He was from another sphere. He came down from not a fallen angel, but he came from another sphere. He once said to me, believing is resistance against the gravity. I mean, gravity, that's resistance against gravity and the force of gravity.
Right. So in a sense, you think some of it, with him dealing with it, was because he did kind of deal in this high intellectual world, that dealing kind of with the more mundane, or even, let's say, ultimately, some of the darker sides of maybe things that came up in the church were things that either he very much surprised him and then certainly disgusted him.
In a way, I mean, he was very much aware of the, as he called it, the mystery of mysterium iniquitatis, the mystery of the evil in the church, the mystery of mankind in men. He was very much aware of the arch sin, of the nature of sin.
Right. Now, one of the chapters you talk about in the first section, from Auschwitz to Regensburg to Turkey, and talk about the minefield of words. Now, a lot of us, and you have it listed as Professor Pope, September 12th, 2006, Regensburg. We hear about the Regensburg speech and that there was a big dust-up or upsetment about it. What was it he said, and why was there such a reaction to it?
Again, as I said, he was like a child. I mean, he said the truth. That was the problem. He said the truth about what later came out. It was before the Islamic State, and what he said is the violence is a crucial issue in Islam. And that's what he dared to talk, but he had no idea what the reaction he would create, he would trigger. The very same day when he had delivered that speech in Regensburg, there was a nun killed in Africa. And then again, he was like a child.
Right. Well, it's interesting in some ways. He talked about the violence, and in many ways he got a very violent response, which seemed to kind of, in a sense, actually verify maybe what he was saying more than most people would like. And in speaking about that, one of the things we hear in the church, and even back then, you talk about the second section in 2007, dealing with dialogue, and at the time you talk about Brazil, China, and Austria, and then it dovetails into dialoguing in relation to the Tridentine Mass and bringing that back. What would you think of the Holy Father? What would the Holy Father think, Benedict Emeritus, think at this time of our recent outreach to China? There seems to be a lot of, conflicting opinions about how that has gone, or what the Church agreed to or didn't agree to.
I mean, for him, dialect was the water he lived in. Talking in dialect was his way of life. He kept talking all the time. He kept conversation, not conversation. He kept thinking it. Language was his thing. He was, I would say, it's very strange, he was the last gentleman of the Gutenberg era. I mean, words, writing, he loved to write and to talk, yeah. And then, but at the end, he went into history as the Pope of icons, you know, when he went to Montpellier and did the face of God, but also the lightning which ended his career. And then, for instance, I never forget when he was in Auschwitz, when the rainbow appeared.
Right.
When he was giving his homily, yeah.
Right, I remember that too, because we were obviously covering that event at that time. So I guess the other thing that struck me too was you tied that into not only dealing with the churches, but also the Tridentine Mass. So what was his relationship to the Tridentine Mass? Because you make a comment in the section from Ground Zero about the fact that throughout his life you could tell that he had great fascination with monasticism as well.
Yeah. No, well, he realized, you know, but it was a pain to him that when theologians talking about the pre-concilian church and the after-concilian church. He said there's only one church in the world, and we have only one liturgy. So he loved the old liturgy. I mean, he hated breaks, and he loved the identity and continuity.
Right, and that was all.
He said there's only one church.
Right. And like you just said, go ahead, about the continuity, and that's been the question that's even been put forth recently again as to where was Vatican II a pastoral continuation, or was there some sort of break? And obviously he believed that was all one, right?
He said there are no two churches, only one church. It started with Jesus Christ and the apostles. There's no other church. Anything else would be heresy.
Right, right. So you've got here, I thought this was an interesting way you described it, the brouhaha about the Society of St. Pius X. You know, we don't hear brouhaha that often. What is the brouhaha, and where does that stand today? Because we hear, I believe that the group that was set up to deal with it has been closed, but then they say that doesn't mean the discussions aren't ongoing. So what was his position on that?
Again, he said we got to get. He said there are too many priests and there's so much good belief in there. We got to keep. He said the time is over. We can't afford another split of a church. We can't afford another. Yeah, there are too many very good Christians. We have to stick together. We can't. Yeah, we have too many splittings in the church. Right.
We have to work for that kind of unity. Now, one of the sections here in the closing minutes we wanted to talk about is kind of maybe what in the media would say the more juicier kind of things, and that's the section you have on vatileaks and the Pope's valet, and which happened April 19th, 2012. And so, who was this valet, and what exactly was vatileaks?
I mean, as a matter of fact, what happened was, I mean, he was the people who we trusted the most. I mean, this butler, he was so close. I mean, he was with him every morning, it was an enormous shock for him. It was a very, very deep wound what he got. But then what he did, the bigger wound, the bigger shock was, then he asked 3 cardinals, Tomco, Herranz, and Di Giorgio, to make research in the Curia and in Rome, and they filled a dossier of more than 700 pages. This he took away with. It was a shocking report. Nobody has seen it except him. And then he brought it to Castel Gandolfo when he resigned. And it was the first thing when he met his successor, Bergoglio, Pope Francis. The peace was laid between them. Mm-hmm. And this is the reason why he stepped back was this. He realized this is too much for me. I can't handle it anymore. He had declared the zero tolerance, but there he had all the reality of the church, of the Curia, what's happening here in Rome. Yeah, mm-hmm. All the Jews departs, everything. Yeah.
Right. Now
it's too much for him.
Now there's you kind of talk about how this isn't quite one of these cheap penny novels in the sense, but you've got the various players and the questions you raise here about the idea. When he was arrested, he was in an unauthorized possession of confidential files, which would have made it difficult for him to deny the charges. He didn't get rid of the material that he had in his home, and it and basically he's the one who kind of ended up, I guess you could say, and I guess you're taking the fall, as if he decided to just do this on his own, claiming that he was somehow helping the Holy Father. Do you believe he was doing this on his own?
I guess so. Yes. I guess so. And then, yeah, I mean, the truth is he wasn't really a hero. But the other day said Pope Benedict said every piece of bread is more mean than he is, and he said he's a very strong guy. He's very strong, very tough. I'm not that sure, but he was not a hero. He maybe was a saint. I hope so, but he was not a soldier, as I said before.
Right. Now, you also mentioned the fact that there's some other players in there, including, I believe, Ingrid Stampa. And it seemed like a certain amount of almost, I describe it in here as jealousy between, like, who's the closest to the Holy Father. What was going on there?
Right. She was called the Papessa here in Rome, the female Pope. And, you know, there was it's very, I mean, I've written all of it. It's too complicated, I mean, to have an interview repeated, but it was very human, very, very human. And then again, envy, you know, envy was the name of the game.
Right.
Very much of it.
Right. It's interesting you say it's not Dan Brown, but it's more Dostoevsky than Shakespeare.
No, right. You're right. Yes.
And when you said that, what was the point you were trying to make?
It was not fantasy, because Dostoevsky he knew all about the human soul. And what they said, I quoted then. A quote of him said was, "Cor hominis abyssus est." The heart of man is a abyss. How do you call it? Abyss.
Exactly. Now, also here, you make the point. You say that, and this is interesting for people who don't necessarily haven't been to Rome or the Vatican, etc. You mentioned that the little state is, after all, really just a big village.
A big what?
A big village.
Yes.
Right. Is that so that everybody knows everybody's business? Is that what that kind of alludes to?
Until today, yeah. And it gets even more villager. Yeah.
So even more so today, you're saying?
Yes, I would say so, yes.
Okay.
Very much so.
Now, in writing this book and putting this together, you also have a section, like I said, I alluded to as well, about, in the section you have Farewell and Ascent to the Mountain of Prayer. You say, in his short reign, Benedict brought talk about the face of God back into the world. What does that mean?
That's very interesting. You know, just the other 2 weeks ago, Cardinal Muller came to Manopello to do a blessing with the face of God with two bishops, Bishop Corleone from San Francisco and Bishop Bruno Forte from Chieti. They blessed the church and the world with this face. But what he did is, you know, the seal of his pontificate is the human face of God. That God that he took the incarnation seriously. He said God became man, which is incredible. You know, the creator of heaven and earth, that he became one man with one face, one character. This is unbelievable. He brought this back. This would be his legacy, I would say.
Do you think in that sense, in seeing that in the face of God and reinforcing the incarnation, that somehow, in many ways, we've lost that sense that either God is, you know, many times more like the force or some kind of this other, and it's not that concrete image of God the Father?
Yeah, it's a concrete image, and then but it's a concrete issue of a concrete person, which is him. And then maybe have talked about it the other day already. He said one of his favorite sayings was the suffering is the eclipse of God. He took it from a Jewish philosopher, Martin Buber, but the eclipse of God is a very good expression. You know, it doesn't mean that it's like the eclipse of the sun. It doesn't mean the sun doesn't exist anymore. He said only we have the shadow of the moon is cast on the sun, so we can't see it for some time. So this is an analogy to him. He said God still exists, but we have the sins of the church have cast a shadow on him, so we don't see, but he will reappear. God will be from the beginning. He will be the very last whom we see.
So, Paul, when was the last time you actually saw or spoke with Pope Benedict Emeritus?
some month, 10 months ago, after my birthday. Yeah. He was very, I mean, he's very frail. He's very, very, I mean, he's withering away, but his spirit is as clear as ever. He's so crispy. He looks, I mean, he's half blind, but when he looks at you, you get a shiver, you get goosebumps when he looks at you.
Right. So when you put this book together,
and then, again,
go ahead.
And my father used to say, you know, the old fences, they remain for the longest. So he's very old fence, but he might, you know, next year he could become the oldest pope we ever heard, we ever had. And then in 2 years' time, in 2021, he's been as long a retired pope as he's been an active pope, which is all. So what we are facing now, what we're looking for now, is the third, or how would I say, the planetarian event. You know, the first planetarian event in this century, in this millennium, was 9/11, when, you know, when the whole world saw what happened in Manhattan. And then the second one was the burial of John Paul II, you know, when the whole world watched how he was brought to, how he suffered, how he died, more or less. The next one will be when this pope will lay on stake on St. Peter's Square, and another pope is mourning in front of him.
Right. And how long did it actually take you, just as we wrap things up, to assemble this book and put it together?
Yeah. The book, there was, I mean, it was, it was always very close to me, though it didn't take that much. I mean, there's not much editing work to it.
Right.
So the pieces were there year to year.
Right. Are these all the articles
you wrote?
More
work for the publisher than for me.
Are these all the articles you wrote during that Are these all the articles you wrote?
No. It's
just the ones you selected? A collection that you put together?
It's a collection. It's maybe a third of them.
Okay. Just before we go, are you working on any other books as we speak?
Of Our Lady, yes.
Okay. We'll look forward to that.
And then what I'm doing now is,
And so when you have that book, we'd love to have you back here on Bookmark. You're always welcome.
All right.
Thank you very much. Speaking with the insights of a unique author, Paul Badde. Benedict Up Close is the title, the inside story of 8 dramatic years, published proudly by EWTN Publishing, available through the EWTN catalog, EWTNRC.com. Thank you very much for joining us here on this international bookmark from Rome. I'm Doug Keck. We'll see you next time.